Thank you very much for the time. General Sullivan, General Ham, Colonel DeWitt, and Mr. Flavin, thank you very much. General Sullivan, you said that when we went into Somalia, we knew nothing. And Daz Dwikowski, you said this is a moment of challenge and that we are at a serious risk of making the same mistakes again, and that we have difficulty defining end states. I want to speak to some of those things. I want to talk about a whole of society approach to political and social information gathering in unstable environments. This is the kind of information that the U.S. does not collect adequately. We all know this, yet it is essential to stability, capacity transfer, and development efforts. And this kind of information can be a force multiplier for conflict transformation, governance capacity, and economic development. And without this kind of a tool, I'm going to suggest the United States is guessing who is influential and what the capacities of a country are. Talking to local experts on the ground is inadequate. They're guessing too. They don't know. The situation is too complex for any expert to grasp. In sum, the problem is that the United States lacks the political and social information it needs to support its missions in unstable countries. Tristan? So on the second slide, there's a puzzle. Because the United States focuses almost exclusively on information about threats, analyses miss the whole of the puzzle. Other pieces are often the drivers of conflict, as we know, and so people have talked about here: the economy, political dynamics, the society, the culture, the web of other local, regional, international actors and interests. So in order to understand threats, we have to understand these other dimensions to a country. Now let's dig into the fun slide. Next one. There we go. Okay. The world of information has changed. I think this is obvious to anybody in this room who is under 30, and I see one person in the room who is under 30. I believe that would be you. It's made a 180-degree shift, and the value and the usage of information has changed completely. The environment has changed, and we are not adapting to it. So if you look at the top, centralized collection and the holding of information made sense when the collection of information was expensive and keeping it secret was inexpensive. So the expense of collecting it's the y-axis, the expense of keeping it is the x-axis, and for the longest time, it's made sense to gather and hoard information. Today, the situation is completely different. Anyone with a cell phone and the internet can get access to more information today than the entire intelligence community could have given President Clinton 20 years ago. And maintaining secrecy today is ever more difficult and expensive. So WikiLeaks, Manning, and Snowden are just the first pebbles of the avalanche. We have to learn how to adapt to this new information environment. The United States is losing competitive advantage daily to every government or organization on the planet that is smaller or less centralized. This includes Russia, Iran, ISIL, Al-Shabaab, Boko Haram, and terrorist networks. They're not constrained by a large central system that holds information. Next map, please. This applies to, if you look at the top priorities in every COCOM's posture statements, everyone is exposed to this rapid degradation and relative strength. So how do we deter Russia and support our allies? How do we make Operation Inherent Resolve more effective? What happens after ISIL's driven out of Anbar? Do we have that kind of information? How do we support self-governance in Somalia and Libya? How do we strengthen self-governance in Honduras and Colombia to reduce transnational crime? We talk about complexity. Today is about complexity. We lack information about the whole of that complexity. What happens when North Korea or Iran open? Relative to other actors, the information advantage of the United States is degrading in all of these situations. So we have a small piece of the solution here that we want to talk about. Next slide, please. Okay. So we attempt to address this widening gap by demonstrating how it will be a tremendous advantage for the United States to generate a more open information environment. So here are some of the assumptions that are under this. In our process, we engage with different groups, and we gather the information from them, and we share the information with all of them. So this includes governments, political parties, influential civil society organizations, businesses, powerful families, extraordinary individuals, local, regional, and international, good and bad. We call them prime actors because they have the greatest influence in shaping the life of the country. We define complex threats as those that require many prime actors to come together and negotiate and enforce solutions together, right? The ocean is filled with unenforced agreements. So having aspirational normative agreements that aren't going to be enforced over the long term by local actors are worse than worthless. They create confusion. Finally, we argue that national sovereignty is required for stability, political legitimacy, self-governance, and the enforcement of a country's social contract, including enforcing solutions to complex threats. Next slide, please. So to accomplish this, we get the prime actors in the life of a country to participate in an open peer assessment process. And we have this tool, INCA, through which the prime actors themselves, so we're not experts, we're like the people at eBay or Yelp. We don't know who's trustworthy or not, but we have a network where they can all assess each other and assess the country. And they themselves generate a shared understanding of each other and the economy, political dynamic, society, and culture. So this is not simply a whole of society approach, it's our society and their society, whoever is engaged in whatever particular country that is. Next slide, please. So there's a little hexagon on the next slide. There we go. Okay, so this is our delivery mechanism. So we use shared funding from local elites and patriotic diaspora, outside governments like the United States, multilateral organizations, and the government of the country itself. For permissions and protections, we ask blessing and protections from those who control each territory we enter, so we don't bring or hire guns. For training, we begin capacity transfer to our partners from day one. This results in better information, more trust, less expense, and improved self-governance. Next, we conduct interviews in multiple languages. The interviews take from hours to days. We produce easy-to-use reports in English and the dominant languages of the country. We publish them online and push them out to all prime actors. That's all prime actors, including all the bad guys as well as the good guys. We conduct media campaigns in English and the dominant languages of the country in order to build support and increase participation by prime actors. We work with traditional, local, regional, and international press, universities, and new media. The cycle continues through ongoing rounds. After ramping up, a new report is generated every 2 months, forever. Next. So this spring, we conducted a first round of this INCA with Syria. The report is online at our website. There's an introduction to the report on the Atlantic Council's Syria Source blog. And we began round 2 with Syria last week. Next slide. So here's an example of the peer assessment actor mapping from the report. So the upper chart shows the relative influence of 49 named prime actors involved in Syria as named and assessed through the eyes of their peers. The range of opinion is shown by the gray bars. Through rounds of feedback, the disagreement will narrow. The lower chart shows the commitment of each of the 49 prime actors to help Syria to adapt. Who profits from instability? Who works for a more stable country? The differences of opinion here, again, are shown by the different colors of each bar, and they will narrow. Everybody's assessments in these interviews are then available, if you look at the report online, all through hyperlinks, and you can read what these prime actors say about each other. Wouldn't it be mission valuable to have this kind of information about Russia, Afghanistan, Israel and its neighbors, Iraq and Syria, Yemen, Al-Shabaab, Somalia, Libya, Boko Haram, Honduras, Nicaragua, El Salvador, Colombia, North Korea, Russia, China, Iran? Next. In-states. So our Daddy and Wachowski spoke about in-states. Well, here's an example. Here's another example of the usefulness of this Inca framework. The prime actors themselves define the end states. So imagine if we had this matrix before going into Iraq in 2003. So the black bars, oh, go back one, please. That's lovely, but there we go. The black bars indicate the country's baseline capacity to govern itself and adapt to threats. The green lines indicate the amount of development possible within 5 to 20 years, best case. So the green line is giving the limit of any kind of realistic end state. The red line marks the threshold of an emerging democracy, which is often the vague goal of a stability operations end state. The goal is sometimes appropriate and sometimes not. Here it is not, and this is dangerous as a default. The hatch lines measure the amount of corruption and confusion that would be driven into this country with an attempt to prematurely impose democracy. That is, the United States made this mistake twice in the last 15 years, as everyone here painfully knows, in Iraq and Afghanistan, due to overambition and no realistic baselines for Phase 4 planning. American, Iraqi, and Afghan lives were lost. Stability and development for Iraq and Afghanistan was delayed. Tens of billions of dollars were wasted. So this kind of mistake is no longer necessary. If we do not adopt the kind of open information methodologies which are sweeping the world and everyone else is using or beginning to use, as a radically different and better approach, will Syrian, Libyan, or Yemeni stability and reconstruction efforts be any better? And click, please. So, compared with savings in lives, time, and money, this approach costs pennies on the dollar. More importantly, with tools like this, the United States can again take the lead in the world in information instability operations. Click. Last slide. So, thank you for your time. Any questions? We've got a couple of minutes.